Today on Keynote.
People aren't wanting tools that look smart. They want tools that are simple. They don't want AI to take over. They want it to get out of the way and just get to work.
My name is Bill Russell. I'm a former CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week Health, where we are dedicated to transforming healthcare one connection at a time. Our Keynote show is designed to share conference-level value with you every week. Now, let's jump right into the episode. All right, it's Keynote, and today I'm joined by Reid Stephan with St. Luke's in Boise, Idaho. Reid, welcome back to the show.
Good to see you, Bill. Happy to be here from Boise. As you know, one of the top two places in the U.S. to live. It's either one or two, depending on your source. The other one is Naples, Florida.
I know we keep sending those articles back and forth. I'm like what happened that Boise all of a sudden took the first spot, and then all of a sudden, like 3 weeks later, took the second spot? Like, what's going on in the judge's mind?
I have no idea. I think it's, like you'll talk about something and then the AI around you hears it and then you start to get surface those articles. I think it must be that.
I have conspiracy theorist friends who say that they believe your phone's listening to you at all times because they'll have like a conversation with somebody about trampolines, and then all of a sudden everything in their search starts showing trampolines to them. Do you buy into some of those conspiracy theories?
I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think that is the modern world we live in, and people are listening and targeting the advertising. And so I think if you think that's a coincidence.
The surveillance state is a real thing.
I think they're trying to make our life easier.
You have a cybersecurity background. I mean, that's your chops coming into this role.
Yeah. That's how I kind of started. Spent a decade at HP, came to St. Luke's 14 years ago to build a cyber program from the ground up, which is a lot of fun, especially with an organization that's big enough to have the resources, but not big like HP was big, where you could turn the wheel, but you would never know for a long time if that made the movement in the direction you wanted. So it was really kind of a sweet spot in terms of the size and scale to do something meaningful, but to also see the results kind of near real time to know if what you're doing is working or not.
It's interesting because my daughter-in-law, I guess what you call her, my son's wife, daughter-in-law, was in town and she was sharing with
bonus daughter, we call on our side.
Bonus daughter, yep. She was sharing with me the breach notification that she got from her payer, and essentially their payer was sending PHI to Google Analytics, and they had to notify her of that. And she happens to be in marketing, so she's like, I know what Google Analytics can do. I just don't understand what they're doing with PHI. It was a very interesting conversation. The connectedness of this world and the cybersecurity risks and the privacy concerns all seem to converge, but I've not found that patients are aware of what's even going on for the most part.
And not just in healthcare, I think in pretty much any aspect of their life. And there was that Netflix documentary a while ago, and basically these tools we use that are free, they're like, if you don't know what the product is,
you are the product. We are collecting your information and someone wants it. Here's where I want to start, because if people want your background, we've done a couple of interviews on here, and you're also part of our town hall host. And so you interview people. In fact, I reached out to Spencer Dorn to have him on the show, and he said, I'm sorry, I'm already booked on your show with Reid. I'm like, yeah.
Finally beat you to something. Things. I'm going to take that as a win.
I said, you talk to Reid first, and I'll grab you over the summer, and then we'll compare the two. So you've been doing some interviews. What are some of the interesting interviews that you've done?
I really think of them more as conversations. Like I listen to your channel. I think you do really exceptional interviews. I wouldn't call myself an interviewer because I don't do it full time, and it's very kind of raw and rough. So I find, just as I kind of in my normal work travels, and sometimes that's like a LinkedIn experience, you come across people who are interesting and they are sharing thoughts that I think need to be amplified across our community. So I just reach out to folks that I sometimes don't even know and say, hey, how about this? And I'm amazed at the hit rate, near 100%. People are willing to do that. I think the one that was most interesting is Jennifer, who at the time worked for the NFL, and she was over their player safety program and was really instrumental in bringing forward technology, artificial intelligence, great partnership with Amazon, and the things they were able to do to more effectively measure and diagnose potential injuries in the NFL players' kind of curriculum from training camp to preseason to regular season. And they use that data to introduce things like the Guardian Cap that you see now in the preseason. And they saw meaningful, positive change in the number of concussions and even other injuries through the use of just mining the data that they had access to. And I just thought there were some really interesting healthcare applications that we could glean from that. And she just did an incredible job connecting what she was doing and then sharing how you might think about that as a healthcare CIO.
I wonder, do they have like an injury dashboard where they have all the diagnosis and, cause and all that other stuff? And they're essentially mining that data as any data scientist would.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating is I wouldn't have thought of this. They have their own, privacy kind of concerns. And so it took them a number of months or even years to get all the teams on board because yes, they had that data, but then like the Packers are like, well, we don't want the Bears having access to our player kind of injury information, kind of their motion data that you have tracked there. So they had to do a lot of groundwork to make sure that the teams felt that if we're going to participate in this, yes, player safety is of paramount importance to us, but we also have to make sure that some other team's not going to use this for a competitive advantage. And so maybe that doesn't map apples to healthcare, but we certainly have areas where we need to secure our data. And if you've got different systems in the same area competing, if they're going to share data to make the community better, they also want to make sure they're not going to be disadvantaged in their operations. So just, really interesting that we have a lot of shared challenges we're all facing regardless of industry.
I have these conversations from time to time where I'm trying to explain to people the life of a CIO. And again, you have no prep for this whatsoever. I'm just throwing this at you. Pick your favorite day of the week and give us an idea of what the day in the life of a CIO might look like. The transitions, the different kinds of meetings, maybe the different problem solving things that you have to go through in that.
Yeah, my favorite day, and I say this like not in jest at all, or my team makes fun of me, but it's Monday. And like sometimes I call it Monday. And it's just the work we do, the mission is so compelling for me. I love what I do. I love who I do it with. I love why we do it. I always start my day early. Like I can't always control kind of how my day wraps up, but I can always control for the most part when my day starts. So I like to get an early start, beat the commute rush. I mean, believe it or not, we have, traffic here in Boise, Idaho.
Oh, yeah. We sent all those people from California.
That's right. That's right. And they are welcome. Let's just be clear about that. So I like to kind of just start my day Monday, looking at the week ahead, getting excited about the meetings that are going to happen, maybe the go lives. We just had a leadership conference last week or yesterday for our entire system that I'm coming off, but it was great. But like day to day, this is the way I think about my work. I don't lose sleep at night worrying about a cybersecurity attack. I've got an incredible CISO in Shauna Hover. I know her and her team, they're up at night. They're worried about that. I don't worry about, is Epic going to be running the next morning? When we have our quarterly upgrade, is it going to go smoothly? I have hundreds of people across teams that focus on that day in and day out. If I was worried about those things, losing sleep, trying to like lean in and offer advice, I would offer minimal value because I am no longer an SME in any of those spaces. And as a CIO, you have to get comfortable, especially if you've come out through a technology kind of background. At some point, you mentally have to pivot and accept the fact that I am more of a generalized administrator, and there's value in that. There's a role for me to do that. And so if I'm worrying about cyber or the network or applications at a too micro of a level, I'm not adding value. And quite honestly, I'm probably like stepping on top of my team members who are doing good work and not helping. What I do worry about is, so those 550 folks across our department, when they show up to work on a Monday, do they have the tools they need to do their job effectively? Have we given them the right training? Do they feel supported and celebrated in the work they do? Do they feel safe? Do they feel like they can take reasonable risks in the work they do and learn from that and then not have retaliation based on those learnings that transpire? So I spend a lot of time, you can call it rounding. I have these CIO small group meetings every other week where I carve out, 15, 20 folks, and we just meet for an hour. And it's just open forum. How are you doing? What's on your mind? What concerns you? And so I am in the people business. And so week to week, I'm focused on how can I best support all the people that are kind of in my sphere of influence, my department, colleagues across the system, And at some point, eventually, the patients and members of our community who look to St. Luke's to receive care and to stay healthy.
One of the things I find interesting is just the breadth of things that you're required to speak into.
Yeah.
Like, so you had your system-wide meeting yesterday. I would imagine you ended up, because technology touches all of those aspects, there's an awful lot that they're looking across the table going, is Epic going to do that? Or
Yeah.
can we, they're sort of looking over, sometimes they're looking over at you for permission. Like, do we have enough resources to do that? Sometimes they're looking over at you to say, isn't there a better way to do this? I mean,
Yeah.
did you find that yesterday?
Yeah. And even our keynote speaker that they brought in, an external gentleman, like AI is just a theme in every industry and conversation now. And so he was talking about just the concept of how we need to lead in this new modern age. And he was weaving AI into that. And he said something that resonates with me, and we've used the same kind of phrasing, which is that the real value of AI is not that it's going to replace human labor, not that it's going to make us more productive, but he talked about the cognitive capacity that it holds a promise to give back to humans, and then what the humans then can do with that extra capacity to, again, better interact in a more human kind of minded approach. And so not to worry about the machines taking over, but the reality of the machines letting us actually connect more deeply and effectively human to human. That's how we think about AI as well.
You started me down a path. So I'm going to give you pairs of things. I'd love to hear you comment on the tension between these two things and how you balance them. So innovation versus, let's say, reliability or stability.
Yeah, I think, at some point it's about definition. Sometimes the word innovation is so ubiquitous and people kind of bring their own defined meaning to that word. I don't think those have to be mutually exclusive. I think innovation is relative and it's not doing something no one's ever done before. Like it could be, but that's not, in my experience, innovation I've been involved in is doing things that maybe we've never done before and that may seem relatively mundane or basic to others, but can be truly transformational in what they offer to your organization or to your system. So like I really value incremental innovation that kind of then builds foundational cornerstones that you can then start to layer and build even more layers onto.
Standardization versus personalization.
It's funny because standardization, there's such a visceral reaction to that phrase.
But we wouldn't be able to function without it.
Yeah, I've been in meetings where it's like, well, we can't use that word because then it gets equated to cookbook medicine, or you're going to prescribe how I work and not rely on my expertise or my intuition. And so I think that, again, you can have standardization that still fully supports and embraces, and I think enhances personalization. So how do you make standardization not become a bad word, but really become something that can be viewed as, it's just the way that we have to work. Like we talk all the time about, we can't have irrational variation in care settings. So it doesn't mean we don't have any variation, but we can't have it be irrational. Like there has to be a method and an approach to it. And that's where I think standardization and personalization can really kind of fit together hand in glove.
I'm interviewing you. You're not interviewing me. So I will.
I want to ask you a question though, because I told you before we kind of started, I want to kind of flip the tables because this should be a conversation. So how would you, that last one, the other thing you bring is like, you talk to a lot of people, so you can kind of synthesize a lot of different ideas and good thinking and pet thinking, and maybe surface insights that benefit our community. So how do you think about standardization and personalization?
In the IT world, we can't function without standardization. And the story I always tell is when I went in there and I said, hey, how many different builds do we have? How many images for builds do we have? Just in the server area. And it was like 145. And I took them out to the Amazon page and I showed them, I'm like, there's six. There's six builds for the entire world on the Amazon AWS page. Like you can give it a little bit more memory and that, but there's six builds. Like, and then away you go. They're like, well, we can't get down to that. Well, they did. They got down to eight. It's like we've never pushed them to think from a standardized process. And it was costing us countless man hours, downtime also. So we can't function that way. I would say medicine agrees with that to a certain extent in that, there are protocols that have been published, peer reviewed and other things. And when we have doctors that ignore those things and just say, well, it's, care is it's an art, not a science, and we're not going to follow the science. It's like, well, as a patient, I sort of want you to follow the peer-reviewed, studied protocols that have been put forward. I'd rather not have you go, well, let's see. I think we should go down this path. But on the flip side, you're with me. You're looking at my entire medical record. You might say, hey, the current approach is this, but I'm looking at this and this. This is the part where it is art. And you go, I think you're a little different
Yeah.
case. I think we're going to look at this a little differently. So that's how
I think it's, that resonates with me as well. And there's certainly, just from an IT ops perspective, there's things that you're absolutely right. Like, there is no option but to standardize. And then we just have to understand that along the way, and that's maybe the science part of it. But especially as you dive into like precision medicine, that is all about like personalization for one person. And so like, how do those things coexist in a way that don't feel like they're incongruent, but that they can be very complementary?
Yeah.
I have another question for you because you sparked a thought. We have to talk about AI. That's like a moral imperative, I think.
It's a moral imperative on any show now. Got it.
So in the last month, I saw two different headlines, both from a current and a former Microsoft CEO. So Satya Nadella was speaking on a podcast, and he said that, quote, roughly, AI hasn't delivered much yet. And I think meant to be provocative. And he kind of shares like, you think we need to see much more economic value before he feels like it's delivered value. And then you have Bill Gates in the same month on a show says that within a decade, AI is going to replace teachers and doctors. So like those kind of extreme positions, and I understand that they're meant to be provocative and maybe they don't believe those 100%, either of those gentlemen, but they're trying to like ignite conversation. But it still does pose an interesting landscape then of like how do we get then from AI hasn't delivered much value yet to then in a decade, someone saying, hey, it's probably going to replace most doctors and teachers. Like, what's really the middle truth, or what has to happen or not happen over the next decade to kind of verify or add credence to either of those statements?
So can I do a read here and say they're both correct?
Okay.
They are both correct.
I love it.
In that Satya Nadella is right in that people don't know how to use AI yet. And I'm finding that more, and I'm teaching my team how to use AI.
Yeah.
To give you an example, I have a 20-page document on my company. It has all the details about my company. I throw it into one of the AI. I just upload the PDF, and I say, you are a McKinsey consultant. We are looking for ways to serve the community better or grow or whatever. I'm like, you start asking me questions to clarify things, and it'll ask me questions. It'll ask me like a series of 10 questions, and I tell it one at a time. So to ask me, I answer. And at some point, without me telling it, hey, now you suggest something, it actually, it got to a certain point and said, would you mind, or might I suggest, is what it said. Might I suggest? And it gave me a couple of things. And I'm like, that's interesting because we were thinking about that very first one. Let's explore that idea together. I have found people don't know how to interact with AI yet to get the most out of it. And my son works for one of the big consulting firms. And I sort of joked with him. I'm like, I have a McKinsey consultant available to me at all times. Like, I would never contract for your services again. And with deep research, I can literally get very detailed, specific stuff about our industry. So I don't think people are using it right yet. On the Bill Gates side, there's a couple things that have happened probably in the last 6 months. One is MCP. I think it's Model Context Protocol, which gives a standard way for AI to access essentially discrete data elements, deterministic data. And so you could ask it a question, and through MCP that gives it access to these like databases and normal stuff, it can start to interact with that data and be more deterministic, which is what we don't like. Hallucinations. We don't like the fact that we ask it the same question 3 times and it gives us 3 different answers. But as we start giving it more specific knowledge about our space, it just becomes more deterministic is the word I'm going to use. The other was Google talked yesterday or Monday, I think, about agent to agent. They're putting together an agent to agent framework where agents can actually expose through its API speak, but through their services, they can expose their capabilities. And so when another agent comes in, it can send it a JSON pack and essentially access those services. And what we know is some of these AI models are better for certain things than other things. I think eventually you will have an MD trained doc in probably just about every specialty that will be an AI specific thing that will, as the back end, have the ability to access all sorts of stuff that is, is the peer reviewed research, more stuff than any doctor who currently practices in the country has access to. I know they have access to, but they just don't have in their head. That will happen in 10 years, easily happen in 10 years, where I'm going to be talking to an AI MD or an AI oncologist, and I might even be able to upload my testing and that kind of stuff, and it's going to come back with very specific things. Replace doctors is the wrong thing to say. Augment doctors in a way that we can't even imagine today.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think as I think about that, like this next 10-year journey, the things that are going to have to evolve or improve to really let us kind of realize that vision. Like one, and you in your group are doing such a great job trying to, I think, coach and elevate how vendors view themselves and how they engage in this experience. But AI, it's being sold as magic so much now. This AI washing that's happening where it's more of a marketing exercise of, saying, hey, this is transformative AI. And really, it's like really basic rule-based logic kind of wrapped in a new UI. And people are starting to call that out. So I think that potentially is a threat then, that AI, like the trust of it or the acceptance kind of arose because there's so much of the AI washing that's happening. I think we have to, in terms of adoption, if it requires new training, it's going to be a barrier. I think the AI in the future, should require no training. People aren't wanting tools that look smart. They want tools that are simple. They don't want AI to take over. They want it to get out of the way and just get to work. So I think AI that requires explanation, training, extra clicks, it's just another hassle factor, especially for clinicians. It's going to cause them to resist. I mean, clinicians are not change resistant. I think we sometimes say that, and it's kind of a lazy.
We've thrown so much change at them. They've proven that they're not change resistant.
Yeah, they are overwhelmed. They're drowning. And so any added task, even a simple extra screen, mouse click, it's the extra water that kind of breaks the dam. So the AI of the future is going to have to really be out of the way, but doing the work it needs to do and require virtually no training.
That's a really good point. Every model I show that has technology into the future, I try to put this line at the bottom that says, that the technology will fade into the background. In other words, it's Star Trek, the computer, Star Trek Next Generation, the computer actually crashes, but I don't remember in the original one that they had anything to that effect. And but they're just walking around the ship going, computer, and it's giving them the information. It's I want to do a CIO digital health escape room with you. I'm going to give you two scenarios. This one I just posted on LinkedIn, just because it strikes me as funny, and I just wanted to see what people. And it's meant to accentuate the problem of vendor lock-in. And it is, here's the phrase that you have to escape from, which is your EHR vendor announces they're sunsetting your platform in 18 months. Now, I know you're on Epic, and I know every time I say something like this, people look at me like, that'll never happen. Let's just assume it does.
I might monologue here for a bit because it's one, I'm glad you're kind of surfacing these questions because it's a real thing. And maybe the Epic model or the Epic example, people are like, oh, that'll never happen. Well, let's just look back maybe historically, like folks that, with the Broadcom acquisition and just some of the pain that happens when you kind of put all your eggs in one basket. So I'm going to answer this kind of back to the AI theme piece as well. And then I promise in time, I'll address your question. Like today with AI capabilities, our EHRs are the gatekeepers and the gate is effectively locked. I mean, the integration friction that exists today too often can be that death blow for what could be a really innovative, transformative capability. And it's not just that like the EHRs, and we're an Epic shop, but I think this is not unique to Epic. It's not that they're just hard to integrate with. But I think in many instances, they're actively hostile to it. And so I've been telling my team lately, three things can be true at once. Epic can be a phenomenal partner, which they are. They can produce and create what I think is the best EHR that exists in the world today. And I believe that's true. But they can also produce software that is, in a lot of instances, just average, especially when it comes to the user experience and that design. And back to the idea of like, how intuitive is it? How much training does it take? And it takes a lot. And so I think what concerns me, back to your point about vendor lock-in, is that we've kind of, and Epic does, they're a great partner. They do a wonderful job with UGM and kind of like showing you the roadmap, and really believe they're altruistic in their desire to improve health for everyone across the planet. But the strength of that partnership and that genuine desire they have to improve healthcare, I think sometimes we settle in for a good enough mindset when excellence is within reach. So, for example, if a CIO asks their internal like Epic team of analysts, like, hey, let me see the roadmap. And what that team gives them is the Epic Verona roadmap. Like, that's a problem. Like, that's not strategy. That's vendor alignment plan dressed up as vision. And so we have a guiding principle that's not unique to us, which is Epic first. And I get it. If Epic can do something or it's on their near-term roadmap, we want to look there first. We sometimes even say things like, if Epic can do 80% of what we need, it's probably good enough because the cost and complexity of a third-party solution is too high of a price to pay to kind of close the last few miles. And, directionally, I think I'm aligned, or at least I agree with that mindset. However, and this gets to the point you're raising, like, what if 80% isn't good enough? Or what if the Epic solution technically checks all the boxes, but the user experience frustrates clinicians? It requires training, or it doesn't even really solve the problem you need to solve altogether. So we can't confuse integration with innovation. And I think sometimes we can allow functionality to be a substitute for usability. So I think that to ward off the kind of doomsday scenario that you described, we can't wait for that moment. We can't wait for the HR vendor to say, hey, we're going to sunset this, and then we're scrambling. Like today, I think as CIOs, as partners of Epic, we need to expect more and ask more of Epic for a more modern, intuitive design. We need to expect and demand deeper, cleaner, more open integrations when we have to go beyond what Epic can offer. And we need to expect that, our needs, not just Epic's roadmap, are guiding what we build, what we buy, or what we adopt. And Epic is still going to be that chief kind of cornerstone, but we have to, I think, kind of evolve the mindset of it's only going to be Epic and we're going to let them develop everything and just adopt it as they go. This next leap in digital health, like these next 10 years we're kind of talking about, they're not going to come from simply following a vendor. It's going to come by leading with clarity about what our users or patients really need, and then partnering with our EHR, but then also what are the things that we buy or build to really drive that experience we want, and to get us in a position then where we're not locked in, so that if a vendor does either go away or just completely pivot their approach, we're kind of left holding the bag.
I recently wrote that series of articles on VMware, and we never thought that would happen.
Yeah.
And it
happened like so quick. And it wasn't like this, boiling a frog in water price increase. It was like, from 0 degrees to, 500 degrees Fahrenheit, like overnight. Like there was, and no real concern, it seems like, with what that impact was to the customer.
Yeah. If I had stood up in front of CFOs and said the word VMware like a year ago, they would have been like, I have no idea what you're talking about, nor should they know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, every CFO in the country is talking about VMware. If you're a vendor, if you're a partner, that's not what you want. You don't want every CFO to have your name on their lips. That's just a bad situation.
Yeah.
Man, I had other escape room things, but you took so long with that one. I don't know.
Well, and part of it is your fault because you had, and I don't know if she's responded to you, that open letter to Judy that you penned, I don't know, several weeks ago on LinkedIn about like, hey, what about a SaaS kind of model for Epic? And not a lift and ship SaaS model, but a true SaaS model. That has generated some good dialogue for our team internally, but then also had us just kind of reevaluate, like, yeah, Epic is a good partner. We trust them. We want to align with them where it makes sense. But maybe we kind of have advocated some critical thinking and decision-making along the way that we need to reassess.
Yeah. I've been in rooms with vendors and with partners who they'll have a gripe session about Epic. And I will essentially say that I'm like, the problem you have is that every one of your clients will tell you they're the best partner I have. I have a BFF. I know their roadmap. Yeah. I know what they're doing. They actually tell me what they're good at and what they're not good at. Like they don't hide it. They're like, hey, this is new. Like if you want to be on the cutting edge, great. But just, and we all know that like the first year Epic releases something, it's okay, but within 3 years, they keep iterating on it and it gets better
Yeah.
usually. So
Yeah.
they're an open book to everybody, and
Yeah.
you have a voice with them, which is kind of
Exactly. And that's my thing. And my last few minutes of comments, none of that is like Epic is bad. And no, they are a great partner. They've earned our trust, but trust should never mean complacency. And I think that's the moment we're in, is like, I wonder if we've become maybe a little too complacent because the partnership and the trust is so strong.
Well, I'll get you to comment on my current article series, which is about actually doing in-house development. So here's your escape room. Team of yours just came to you and said, look, I think we have a low code, no code way of developing something. I need to hire at least 3 people. It's going to cost us roughly $500,000 a year to do this. But I believe we could drive $1 million in savings a year out of rev cycle. Is that something you contemplate, or are you averse to developing software just because of the scars you have from the past?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. It's funny. I think I've evolved. I think if you would have asked me that a year ago, I'd have been like, no way. Because then I developed something and then the SMEs that built it, like they retire, they go somewhere else. Then I've got this legacy thing that I've got to figure out how to support. But I think the gains from AI and some of the efficiencies there, I think have opened that door up in a way that maybe we closed before. But also just like thinking through, if that happens, if you low code something internally and then the talent that wrote it like leaves and you don't have like, good code documentation and then you don't know how to support it. Like that's not a flaw with the approach. That's a flaw with how you kind of the operational oversight of what. So we're having those very conversations today of, I've got a relatively, small development team, highly efficient, really effective. Is it growing that team? Is it partnering with a local company that can offer us some development capacity? But to your point, I think we have to be much more open to those areas where it's going to make more sense for us to build it because we can do it faster and cheaper than we could have a year ago. But then to your point, let's learn from maybe the scars of the past and let's future proof it. Like, let's make sure that, if we design something, it's not single threaded with 1 or 2 SMEs that we're then beholden on. Like if they then leave or come and say, hey, you've got to pay me more, or I'm not going to do this anymore. So I think you can de-risk that approach. But I think absolutely that needs to be one of the tools in your toolkit going forward.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting is you can now take this code that they've given you and they leave the company and you can just run it through AI and say, evaluate this code and it'll document it for you. It'll do all sorts of stuff. And you sit there go, even I consider myself an average to mediocre coder. I've coded stuff my entire career, but it's never been like the focus. Like I've never been like, that's what I'm going to do with my life is be a coder. But I know enough to be dangerous. Now with AI, I can see the patterns and I go, man, that doesn't look right. But I throw it into AI and I say, what's wrong with this code? And it goes, well, the patterns are all wrong. And you're not creating modules. You're not, anyway. 229 project, we focus a lot on the next generation training and whatnot. I'd love to hear a mentor story. So who has fundamentally changed your thinking as a mentor?
Well, I'm not going to give you the satisfaction and say Bill Russell.
No, nor should you.
You've been a great mentor for me. It's been fun these last kind of 5 years. Like historically, my approach was to go to a big event and kind of fill in what that big event is. And you sit in rows and you kind of absorb information. And you or someone I was with a couple weeks ago said, we are inspired in rows, but we're transformed in circles. And so I would lead those big events and I'd be inspired. I'd have great thoughts and I would come back and then that great thought, that nugget of inspiration would then meet the real world or I would just, something else would like come across my desk and it would be easy for that to kind of just slowly kind of fade into the background. And so what I've found really valuable is meaningful connection in smaller settings, like smaller events. And your 229 project is a great example of that kind of smaller event where you connect more authentically with people. You sit in circles, sometimes figuratively, sometimes literally, and you get to know, people outside of just their title. And then you have really kind of candid, open dialogue and conversations that extends far beyond that event. And so one of the folks that I've met along the way is Shane Thielman, who's the CIO of Scripps, and just over the last several years has become a good friend, a good colleague. He and I now for 3 years have hosted a Teach of Nine project, January, February timeframe.
I've witnessed the two of you going back and forth on a topic, and I thought, man, I wish I could have just turned on the recorder as you guys were going back and forth. No, it was really good. It was really pragmatic. He's really smart, which is.
Yeah. And he's just, we're wired the same way in some regards, but, he has a different background than I do. And so it's a couple of things. Like there's times when I'll just, text him, call him, send him an email with something that I'm thinking about or just like clearly struggling with, just to get perspective. Sometimes it's cathartic reassurance, like comparative suffering is a real value proposition in this. But also sometimes I find I've been with him enough now, like I'll be in a meeting and something will happen, and I'll kind of feel myself reacting internally in a certain way. And I'll be like, wait a minute, like I've been in that meeting with Shane and like I see him, he's a processor and I think his resting heart rate is like 55. And so he just like takes time to like think through. And then when he speaks, he's not just reacting. He's not just waiting for his chance for someone to stop speaking to jump in. Like he has meaningful comments to offer. So that's been just a real value in my life, professionally and personally. And that's just one of many.
Yeah.
But just the intentional connection with other colleagues, getting to know them, spending time together in smaller, intimate settings. I would recommend that to anybody. It's going to make you better, and it's going to make your team better, and it's going to benefit the system or the hospital where you work.
All right. I'm just going to give you, this is going to be rapid fire.
Yep.
As we go, just real quick, fast paced. I'm going to name some emerging technologies and love your unfiltered thoughts on this. Quantum computing.
Interesting. I've got smart people who I'm saying, keep me informed of when this needs to be something that is a topic that I need to be prepared to talk to the board about. So for me, it still feels like, it's not as a current day state as like generative AI.
It's out there a little bit.
Yep.
Ambient clinical intelligence.
Game changer. The AI, if it's just the AI scribe, I think it's now reached the point of commodity. But if you talk about the intelligence, a platform, a coding aware kind of solution, I think the utility from that, the return on investment is truly transformational.
Health data exchange. And maybe not an innovative whatever, but I'm just curious. Quick thought on health data exchanges.
Misunderstood. So in our state, I've had leaders in our system say, like, why do we still support the Idaho Health Data Exchange? Because we're on Epic, St. Al's, which is the Trinity shop, they're on Epic. We've got Community Connect, we've got other ways to exchange information. But the reality is that it's still a really valuable data asset for our state. And there's information they have there that's not readily accessible, even with the interoperability gains we've made in other areas.
RPA.
Disrupted. I think that, with what's already happened and then over the next year, the things OpenAI is hinting at, I think the vendors in that space, whether it's a UiPath or et cetera, or whoever, they're going to have to really kind of reimagine what their value proposition is. Because I think you're going to be able to do what you today maybe need a tool to do. You're not going to need that tool in the future. You're going to be able to do it on your own.
I think the last question from me, and if you have another question for me, feel free to throw it out. But
yeah,
curious, Boise, Idaho, you've now interacted with a lot of different health systems. Are there things you hear that you go, you know what, our community's different. We're going to do that differently than say you would in another area of the country?
They say that the problem we share are pretty universal in healthcare, but maybe the solutions are local. I think that in our situation is unique as well, like just based on, we've got some geographic isolation. And so maybe we don't face the same.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised you guys didn't go to the top of Idaho. And then somebody said, oh, you realize there's a mountain range. I'm like, no, I didn't realize there's a mountain range. Like, how would I look at a map and see that mountain?
Yeah, it's like people say Idaho is actually like, it feels like 3 different states because you got North Idaho, Little Panhandle, and they feel connected more to Washington and maybe like Olympia. Obviously, Boise, Southwest Central Idaho is there. And then Eastern Idaho, like they feel more connected, I think, in some regards to Salt Lake. And so it's really interesting. Like we're the Southwest Central Idaho thing. I think the competition piece is when I talk to colleagues, we just don't, have some of the same concerns that they seem to share about, competing for patients. Like we really have a lot of advantages as a community-owned health system as well. And just that connection, our geographic kind of small size footprint, I think also makes it unique. Like I'm not managing locations and staff across multiple states or across the entire country. So I think that makes it different. In some ways, a little cleaner and easier.
Is every one of your hospitals driving distance from where you're sitting?
Yeah, I could get in my car right now within 2 hours, be either to our farthest east, farthest west, or farthest north location.
Wow. Yeah, that's a little different. I had to fly from Southern California to West Texas.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about different cultures.
Yeah. And it's totally changed our approach to we just did a return to office approach as well. And just kind of our mindset around that is going to be very different than a system that's spread across the country. Just different.
In the pandemic, did you end up hiring across the country?
We have some Idaho and Oregon during that time were the only states that we could hire into without exceptions. And for the most part, we have kept our footprint of staff within the area of where we deliver service. And so that continues to align then with our return to office. And going forward, our strategy is not to have remote employees. Everyone's either on-site or hybrid, and we'll live within a shadow of a same facility. That's important to us. Like when you're receiving care, living in the area that you're actually working for, it makes a difference. Where if you're, living back east, someone working for St. Luke's in Idaho, the things happening here aren't going to resonate or connect like they would if you're living here.
That's great. By the way, I told you about the post, your EHR vendor announces they're sunsetting.
Yeah.
My post on LinkedIn, it's 45 minutes old, cracks me up. Wes Wright has this to say, update my resume and let Judy know that I'm in play. I love putting these things out there just to see what people say. Oh man, Reid, thank you. Thank you for being a part of the Community 229 project. Love the fact that you're hosting events. Also love the interviews that you're doing. I look forward to the Spencer Dorn one. By the way, out of curiosity, I'm curious if we had the same thought process. Like I was reading a couple of his comments and then one of his posts, and I thought he has a very good take on AI and a very practical take on AI.
Yes.
And I thought,
yeah, totally. And that's what sparked my thought.
Yeah.
And his thinking is maybe different than my kind of resting state thinking. And that to me is always a pull. So I'm like, okay, like that's what I want. Like, I don't want to just talk to people that think the way I do because there's I'm probably wrong. So I'm just like doubling down on then maybe the wrong idea. And so he'll post thoughts and I'm like, I don't know if I see it that way. Like he did one last week where he referenced a kind of analysis of ambient listening. And kind of the takeaway was like, hasn't really provided much value. And I'm like, that's not been our experience. And like, I think it's added great value. And I think there's a lot more value to add. But what is it that you're seeing or thinking that maybe needs to temper my enthusiasm or maybe elevate the skepticism? So
it's going to be want to ask them which ambient tools they're using and how they're integrated. Or maybe if you don't ask them, I'll ask them in July when I talk to them.
Well, it's a good point because as I talk to colleagues and who use different ambient vendors, the ones that are just doing the AI note scribing, I would agree. Then it's like, okay, it's not giving us back all this time that maybe we thought, and there's really no ROI there. The vendor that we're using, it's giving us the time back, but the ROI is there because it's coding aware kind of built in from the ground up, and that's been the game changer.
Yep. Reid, thank you again for your time. Appreciate you. And I look forward to the response. I decided to do a very different type of interview with you. So if people have comments, love to hear them.
Bill, anytime you want to relocate to Boise, Idaho, that would probably push it over and make it the number one, across the board. That's probably the back and forth right now is just the Bill Russell effect. Yeah. So you are more than welcome.
Yeah, that's what you need, another celebrity moving into Boise, Idaho. As my kids like to say, Bill's a celebrity amongst a very small group of people. Yeah, that's right. All right. Thanks, Reid.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for listening to this week's Keynote. If you found value, share it with a peer. It's a great chance to discuss and in some cases start a mentoring relationship. One way you can support the show is to subscribe and leave us a rating. Love it if you could do that. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.